Welcome to Easy Drift Sleep. Tonight, we're going to spend some time together with one of the most beloved stories in all of Scripture. Before we begin, if this channel has helped you find rest, we'd love it if you'd take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps more people find their way here, and it means a great deal to us. Tap the bell so you never miss a new story. Now, find a comfortable position. Let your body settle. Let your breathing slow. There's nothing you need to do right now, nowhere you need to be. Just rest and let the story carry you. Tonight's story is The Life of Joseph, Part 1, From the Pit to Potiphar's House. The desert air was growing cool now, as the sun began its long, slow descent towards the western horizon. A faint, reddish glow spread across the vast, open sky, painting the distant hills in shades of deep purple and soft orange. The last of the day's heat was still radiating from the dry, cracked earth, but a gentle breeze, carrying the faint scent of dust and distant scrub, promised a cooler night. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind through sparse, tough grasses, and the distant, rhythmic bleating of a flock of sheep settling down for the evening. Perhaps the faint, almost imperceptible rustle of a lizard moving through the dry brush. In the land of Canaan, not far from the ancient city of Hebron, a man named Jacob lived with his large family. He was an old man now, his face weathered by many years under the sun, his eyes holding the stories of a long and often difficult life. He had 12 sons, and among them, one held a very special place in his heart. This was Joseph, the son of his old age, born to Rachel, the wife he had loved more than any other. Joseph was 17 years old, a young man on the cusp of adulthood, but still with the lightness and sometimes the naivete of youth. Jacob had a particular fondness for Joseph, a love that perhaps shone a little too brightly, a little too openly, for the comfort of his other sons. He had shown this affection in a very tangible way, by making Joseph a special tunic. This was not just any garment, it was a long, sleeved robe, often described as a coat of many colors. In that ancient world, such a garment was more than just clothing. It was a symbol. It marked Joseph as a favored son, perhaps even indicating that Jacob intended to bestow upon him a greater inheritance or a position of leadership among his brothers, a position usually reserved for the firstborn. The other sons, particularly the older ones, had watched this favoritism unfold, and a quiet, simmering resentment had begun to grow within them. Joseph, for his part, spent his days with his younger brothers, the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, who were Jacob's concubines. He would often bring back reports to his father about his brothers, perhaps observing their conduct in the fields or their management of the flocks. These reports, whether innocent or not, only served to deepen the rift between Joseph and his elder siblings. They saw him as a tattletale, someone who used his favored position to gain more of their father's attention, or worse, to undermine them. The brothers could not speak peaceably to Joseph. Their words were often sharp, their glances cold. The love their father showed him was a constant, irritating presence, like a stone in their shoe that they could not remove. The special tunic, with its bright, perhaps woven patterns, or its long, flowing sleeves, was a daily reminder of their father's preference. Every time they saw Joseph wearing it, a fresh wave of bitterness would wash over them. Then came the dreams. Joseph began to have vivid dreams, and in the innocence of his youth, or perhaps a lack of understanding of the delicate family dynamics, he shared them with his brothers. The first dream was particularly striking. He told them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were all out in the field, binding sheaves of grain. And suddenly, my sheaf rose up and stood upright. Then, your sheaves gathered around my sheaf and bowed down to it." A heavy silence followed his words. The brothers exchanged glances, their faces hardening. One of them, perhaps Reuben or Simeon, spoke, his voice laced with sarcasm. "So, you think you will reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?" The implication was clear. They understood the symbolism of the dream immediately. It was a dream of superiority, of Joseph's elevation above them. This dream, far from bringing them closer, only intensified their hatred. They hated him even more for his dreams and for the words he spoke. But Joseph had another dream, and again, he felt compelled to share it. He recounted, "I had another dream, and this time I saw the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing down to me." This dream was even more audacious than the first. The sun and moon, in ancient Near Eastern symbolism, often represented parents, while the stars represented siblings or other family members. This time, even Jacob, his loving father, was troubled by the dream. He rebuked Joseph, though perhaps gently, saying, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" Jacob understood the dream's meaning instantly, and it suggested a complete reversal of the natural order. Yet, despite his rebuke, Jacob kept the matter in mind, perhaps pondering its significance, wondering if there was some deeper truth to Joseph's visions. The other brothers, however, continued to burn with envy. Time passed, and the tensions in the family remained. One day, Jacob's older sons had gone to pasture their father's flocks in Shechem. Shechem was a considerable distance from Hebron, perhaps a journey of 2 or 3 days on foot or with slow-moving flocks. It was a fertile valley, known for its good grazing lands, but it was also a place with a history of trouble for Jacob's family, a place where Simeon and Levi had once acted with violent vengeance. After some time, Jacob said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." Joseph, ever obedient, replied, "Here I am." Jacob continued, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So, Jacob sent him from the valley of Hebron, a place of settled life, towards the distant, potentially dangerous lands of Shechem. Joseph began his journey. He walked through the familiar hills and valleys around Hebron, the air still warm from the morning sun, the dust rising in small clouds with each step. He carried with him his father's instructions, and perhaps the weight of his father's expectations. The journey was long, and as he neared Shechem, he began to search for his brothers and their flocks. The landscape would have been dotted with olive groves, fig trees, and terraced fields, but also stretches of rocky, open ground. He wandered in the open country, looking for any sign of them. A man, perhaps a local shepherd or a traveler, found him wandering in the field. The man asked him, "What are you seeking?" Joseph replied, I am seeking my brothers. Can you tell me where they are pasturing their flocks?" The man answered, "They have moved on from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" Dothan was another grazing area, further north from Shechem, perhaps another day's journey. It was known for its deep wells and good pastures, making it a suitable place for large flocks. Joseph, without hesitation, turned his steps northward, following the new direction. He continued his solitary journey, the sun now higher in the sky, beating down on his head. The long, distinctive tunic would have stood out against the muted colors of the landscape, a splash of color in the dusty browns and greens. Finally, after much walking, Joseph reached Dothan. From a distance, his brothers saw him coming. They recognized the distinctive figure, the long, flowing robe, the way he carried himself. Even before he drew near, they knew it was Joseph. And as they watched him approach, their long-held hatred, which had been simmering beneath the surface, began to boil over. They began to conspire against him. "Here comes this master of dreams," one of them sneered, perhaps Simeon or Levi, known for their fiery tempers. Another added, "Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we can say that a wild animal devoured him. And then we will see what becomes of his dreams." The words were spoken with a chilling casualness, a cold calculation that spoke of deep-seated malice. They saw an opportunity, far from their father's watchful eye, to rid themselves of the source of their envy. But Reuben, the eldest son, heard their wicked plan. Though he had his own faults and had often been at odds with his father, he still possessed a measure of conscience, or perhaps a fear of the ultimate consequence of fratricide. He wanted to save Joseph from their hands. He said to them, "Let us not take his life. Shed no blood. Just throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him." Reuben's intention was to return later, after his brothers had moved on, and rescue Joseph, bringing him back to their father. He hoped to restore himself in Jacob's eyes, perhaps to regain some of the favor he had lost. The brothers, perhaps thinking Reuben's suggestion was a less messy way to achieve their goal, agreed to his plan. They saw it as a way to dispose of Joseph without directly shedding his blood, a way to make him disappear. As Joseph finally reached them, tired from his long journey, perhaps with a hopeful smile on his face, expecting a reunion with his family, they surrounded him. They seized him roughly. Without a word, they tore off his beautiful, special tunic, the coat of many colors that symbolized his father's love and their own bitter resentment. The fabric would have ripped, perhaps, or been pulled from his body with force, leaving him feeling exposed and vulnerable. The suddenness of their attack, the violence of their actions, must have been terrifying for the young man. Then they dragged him towards a pit, one of the many dry cisterns or wells that dotted the landscape, used to collect rainwater during the wet season, but now empty and deep. They threw him into it. The fall would have been jarring, the bottom cold and hard. The pit was empty of water, but it was dark, damp, and likely contained scorpions or other creatures that sought shelter from the sun. Joseph was alone, trapped, looking up at the circle of sky above, his brothers' faces perhaps visible for a moment before they turned away. His cries for help, his pleas for mercy would have echoed against the stone walls of the pit, but they fell on deaf ears. His brothers simply sat down to eat their meal as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. The sun continued its journey across the sky, casting long shadows, and the desert wind still whispered through the dry grass. The sounds of their eating, the casual chatter, would have drifted down to Joseph in the darkness, a cruel counterpoint to his despair. As they ate, they looked up and saw a caravan approaching in the distance. It was a company of Ishmaelites, merchants from Gilead, traveling westward towards Egypt. Their camels were laden with spices, balm, myrrh, and gum resin, valuable commodities in the ancient world, destined for the markets along the Nile. The sight of the caravan sparked a new idea in Judah, one of the brothers. Judah, perhaps feeling a pang of guilt, or simply thinking more practically than his brothers, spoke up. "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." The idea of selling him into slavery seemed a more palatable option than outright murder. It would still remove Joseph from their lives, but without the direct stain of blood on their hands. His brothers listened, and the suggestion resonated with them. It offered a solution that was both profitable and less morally burdensome, at least in their twisted reasoning. They agreed. As the Ishmaelite traders drew near, the brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit. He would have been disoriented, perhaps bruised, his clothes dirty and torn. The sudden emergence from the darkness into the bright desert light would have been blinding. They haggled with the merchants, discussing the price for this young man. In the end, they sold Joseph for 20 shekels of silver. 20 shekels was the standard price for a male slave of Joseph's age at that time, as recorded in ancient laws like the Code of Hammurabi. It was a sum that, while not insignificant, was a stark measure of their contempt for their own brother. The Ishmaelites took Joseph, bound him, and continued their journey towards Egypt, leaving the brothers with their silver and their dark secret. Later, Reuben returned to the pit. He had perhaps been away tending to some part of the flock, or had deliberately separated himself from his brothers, waiting for the opportune moment to rescue Joseph. When he reached the pit and looked in, he saw that Joseph was not there. His heart must have sunk. He tore his clothes in a gesture of grief and despair, a sign of deep distress. He went back to his brothers, his voice filled with anguish. "The boy is gone. And where shall I go?" He felt the weight of responsibility, the failure of his plan, and the potential wrath of his father. The brothers, however, had already concocted their plan to deceive Jacob. They took Joseph's distinctive tunic, the one they had ripped from him earlier. Then they slaughtered a young goat and dipped the tunic in its blood. The rich, dark red blood would have soaked into the fabric, making it appear as if Joseph had been savagely attacked by a wild animal. The sight of it would be unmistakable. They brought the blood-stained tunic to their father, Jacob. "We found this," they said, their voices carefully controlled, perhaps feigning concern. "Examine it, please, and see whether it is your son's tunic or not." Jacob took the garment, his hands trembling. He recognized it immediately. The colors, the weave, the length, it was undeniably Joseph's. His heart must have shattered. "It is my son's tunic," he cried out, his voice filled with agony. "A wild animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." The image was vivid and horrifying. He tore his own clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son for many days. The sackcloth, a coarse, rough fabric, was a traditional sign of deep sorrow and mourning in that culture. All his sons and daughters gathered around him, trying to comfort him, but he refused to be consoled. "No," he declared, his voice heavy with grief, "I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning." Sheol was the ancient Hebrew concept of the grave, the underworld, a place of shadows. And so, Jacob continued to weep for Joseph, his beloved son, believing him to be dead, torn apart by a beast in the wilderness. The brothers watched their father's profound sorrow, perhaps some of them feeling the first stirrings of guilt, others simply relieved that their secret remained hidden. Meanwhile, the Ishmaelite caravan continued its long journey southwards, Joseph among them. The desert stretched out before them, vast and unforgiving. The days were hot, the nights cool. The rhythmic sway of the camel, the jingle of the bells on their harnesses, the constant dust, and the endless horizon would have become Joseph's new reality. He was no longer a favored son, but a slave, stripped of his identity, far from his home and family. Eventually, the caravan reached Egypt. This was a land of ancient wonders, a civilization far more advanced and complex than the pastoral lands of Canaan. The Nile River, the lifeblood of Egypt, flowed majestically, its banks lined with lush vegetation, towering temples, and bustling cities. The air would have been thick with the smells of the market, spices, incense, cooking food, and the distinct scent of the river itself. The sounds would have been a cacophony of human voices, animal cries, and the distant murmur of the city. In Egypt, the Ishmaelites sold Joseph to a man named Potiphar. Potiphar was an officer of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. He was the captain of the guard, a high-ranking official responsible for the security of the royal palace and the personal safety of the pharaoh. His household would have been large and influential, a place of power and order. Joseph, now a slave in a foreign land, found himself in this grand and imposing household. He was young, perhaps still only 17 or 18 years old, and entirely alone. Everything around him would have been new and strange, the language, the customs, the gods, the architecture. The vastness of the Egyptian civilization, with its monumental structures and intricate social hierarchy, must have been overwhelming. Despite his circumstances, Joseph possessed an inner strength and a remarkable ability. The Bible tells us that the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. This isn't to say that his life was easy, but that he had a certain grace, a competence, and perhaps a quiet dignity that set him apart. He performed his duties diligently, whatever they were, and he quickly gained the notice of his master, Potiphar. Potiphar observed Joseph's work, his dedication, and the way things seemed to prosper under his hand. He saw that the Lord was with Joseph and that the Lord made all that he did to succeed in his hand. This was a common belief in the ancient world, that a person's success was often a sign of divine favor. Potiphar, a powerful Egyptian, recognized this quality in his young Hebrew slave. Because of this, Joseph found favor in Potiphar's eyes and became his personal attendant. This was a significant promotion for a slave, placing him in a position of trust and close proximity to his master. Potiphar entrusted Joseph with the management of his entire household. He made him overseer over his house and put him in charge of all that he owned. This meant that Joseph had control over all of Potiphar's possessions, from the smallest utensil to the largest estate. He would have managed the other servants, overseen the finances, and ensured the smooth running of the vast household. It was a position of immense responsibility, requiring intelligence, integrity, and organizational skills. Joseph, despite his youth and his background as a shepherd, proved himself more than capable. From the moment Potiphar made Joseph overseer in his house and over all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's household for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had, in house and field. This blessing was not just spiritual, it manifested in tangible ways. The crops might have yielded more abundantly, the livestock might have multiplied, and the household affairs might have run with remarkable efficiency and prosperity. Potiphar saw this prosperity, and he understood its source. He left everything he had in Joseph's charge. With Joseph in charge, Potiphar concerned himself with nothing except the food he ate. He trusted Joseph completely, knowing that his affairs were in capable hands. Joseph managed everything, from the daily provisions to the long-term investments, with a meticulousness and wisdom that belied his years. Joseph was a handsome young man, well-built and good-looking. His physical appearance, combined with his evident competence and quiet demeanor, did not go unnoticed in Potiphar's household. In that ancient world, physical beauty was often seen as a sign of divine favor, and it certainly played a role in how people were perceived. After some time, Potiphar's wife began to notice Joseph. She saw his good looks, his strong physique, and perhaps the quiet confidence with which he carried out his duties. She began to cast her eyes upon Joseph, and one day, she propositioned him directly. "Lie with me," she commanded, her words a direct and unequivocal demand. This was a dangerous situation for Joseph. As a slave, he was in a vulnerable position, subject to the whims of his master and his master's wife. To refuse a direct command from the wife of a powerful official could have severe consequences. However, Joseph was a man of principle, deeply rooted in his understanding of right and wrong, and his reverence for God. He refused her. He said to Potiphar's wife, "Look, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he has in my charge. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" His refusal was firm and clear. He appealed to his loyalty to Potiphar, his master who had placed such trust in him. He also appealed to a higher authority, recognizing that such an act would not only be a betrayal of his master but also a sin against God. In his mind, the moral transgression was paramount. Despite his clear refusal, Potiphar's wife did not give up. Day after day, she spoke to Joseph, trying to persuade him, to entice him. She pressed him, perhaps using flattery, threats, or emotional manipulation. But Joseph remained steadfast. He refused to lie beside her or even to be with her. He avoided her presence whenever possible, trying to maintain distance and prevent any further attempts. One day, Joseph went into the house to do his work, as was his custom. It happened that none of the men of the house were inside. Perhaps they were out in the fields, or at the market, or attending to other duties. The house was unusually quiet, and Potiphar's wife saw her opportunity. She seized him by his garment, pulling him towards her. "Lie with me," she demanded again, her voice perhaps desperate or angry. Joseph, startled by her sudden aggression, struggled to free himself. He knew he could not stay. He pulled away from her, leaving his garment in her hand as he fled. He ran out of the house, leaving his outer cloak behind. Potiphar's wife, now furious and humiliated by his rejection, realized she had been exposed. She knew she could not admit her own wrongdoing. She changed her story, twisting the events to protect herself and to exact revenge on Joseph. She called out to the men of her household, who were now returning or perhaps had been within earshot. She cried out to them, "See! He has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. He came into me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house." She painted Joseph as the aggressor, a foreign slave attempting to assault her, and herself as the victim. She kept Joseph's garment beside her, a tangible piece of evidence for her fabricated story. When her master, Potiphar, came home, she recounted the same tale to him. "The Hebrew slave, whom you brought among us, came into me to insult me. But as soon as I lifted my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." When Potiphar heard the words that his wife spoke to him, saying, "This is the way your slave treated me," his anger was kindled. The accusation was grave, an insult to his honor and his household. The evidence of Joseph's garment, left behind, seemed to corroborate his wife's story. In that society, the word of a wife, especially a high-ranking one, often carried significant weight, and the honor of a master was paramount. In his rage, Potiphar took Joseph and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. This was not a common jail, but a royal prison, likely a dungeon within the palace complex or a nearby fortress. It was a place of darkness, despair, and harsh conditions. So Joseph was there in the prison. From the heights of being the overseer of a grand household, he was plunged into the depths of a dungeon, unjustly accused and condemned. The dreams of sheaves bowing down and stars prostrating themselves must have seemed a distant, cruel mockery of his present reality. He was alone again, stripped of his position, his freedom, and his reputation. Yet, even in the prison, the narrative tells us that the Lord was with Joseph. And he showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. This was a remarkable turn of events, a testament to Joseph's character and the unseen hand of divine providence. Even in the most oppressive environment, Joseph's innate qualities shone through. The keeper of the prison, the man in charge of the royal captives, began to observe Joseph, just as Potiphar had before him. He saw Joseph's diligence, his quiet strength, and perhaps the way he interacted with the other prisoners. he recognized something different about this young Hebrew. The keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who ordered it. This was an extraordinary level of trust to place in a prisoner, especially one accused of such a serious crime. It meant Joseph was responsible for their daily needs, their discipline, and the general management of the prison population. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Once again, Joseph's presence brought order and success, even to a place of confinement and despair. The prison keeper, like Potiphar, seemed to intuitively understand that Joseph carried a blessing, a quality that ensured prosperity wherever he was placed. Time passed in the prison. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. Joseph, the once favored son, now a slave and a prisoner, continued his duties with quiet competence. The sounds of the prison would have been constant, the clanking of chains, the murmurs of other captives, the heavy tread of guards, the distant sounds of the city outside the thick walls. The air would have been damp and heavy, perhaps smelling of stone, sweat, and despair. Among the other prisoners in the royal dungeon were two high-ranking officials from Pharaoh's court, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Both had offended their master, the Pharaoh, in some way, and had been cast into this same prison where Joseph was confined. It was the captain of the guard, Potiphar himself, who had placed them there. The captain of the guard assigned Joseph to attend to them. So Joseph waited on them, serving their needs, bringing them their food, and listening to their concerns. He was a trusted attendant, even for these important prisoners. He would have observed their moods, their anxieties, and their hopes for release. One night, both the chief cupbearer and the chief baker had dreams. Each man had his own dream, each with its own interpretation, and they dreamed them on the same night. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he noticed that they looked troubled, their faces clouded with worry. He asked them, "Why are your faces downcast today?" The chief cupbearer and the chief baker replied to him, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." In ancient Egypt, dreams were often considered messages from the gods, and their interpretation was a serious matter, often entrusted to priests or wise men. To have a dream and not understand its meaning was a source of great anxiety. Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." He acknowledged that the ability to interpret dreams came from a divine source, not from human wisdom alone. He offered his assistance, not out of arrogance, but with a quiet confidence in the God he served. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph. He said, "In my dream, behold, there was a vine before me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." Joseph listened carefully, his mind processing the images and symbols. He then gave the interpretation to the chief cupbearer. "This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. And you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. Then Joseph made a request, a quiet plea for remembrance. "Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this prison. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit." He reminded the cupbearer of his unjust imprisonment, hoping that a word from a man in such a high position could lead to his freedom. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he also spoke to Joseph. "I also had a dream. Behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head." Joseph listened again, his expression calm and unreadable. Then he gave the interpretation to the chief baker. "This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head, but from you, and hang you on a tree. And the birds will eat your flesh from you." The contrast between the 2 interpretations was stark, one of restoration and life, the other of condemnation and death. Joseph delivered both interpretations with the same calm, even tone, simply conveying the message he believed to be from God. The chief baker must have felt a cold dread settle over him. And it came to pass on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday. Pharaoh made a feast for all his servants. On this auspicious day, he lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker among his servants. This phrase, "lifted up their heads," was an idiom that could mean either to restore or to execute, depending on the context. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and the cupbearer placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, just as Joseph had predicted. The cupbearer resumed his duties, serving the Pharaoh, his dream fulfilled. The sounds of celebration, the clinking of cups, the music, would have filled the palace. But the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted, was hanged. His dream, too, was fulfilled, but with a tragic end. The grim reality of Pharaoh's justice was swift and absolute. The events unfolded exactly as Joseph had foretold, confirming the truth of his interpretations. Yet, despite this clear demonstration of Joseph's prophetic gift and his plea for remembrance, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. The joy of his own restoration, the return to his position of power and comfort, overshadowed any memory of the young Hebrew who had helped him in the darkness of the prison. 2 full years passed. Joseph remained in the prison, his hope for release, once kindled by the cupbearer's promise, slowly fading with each passing day. The monotony of prison life, the constant sounds of the other prisoners, the heavy air, the slow passage of time, would have been his constant companions. He continued his duties, managing the prison, but the quiet ache of forgotten hope must have lingered within him. After these 2 long years, Pharaoh himself had 2 dreams. He was sleeping, perhaps in his grand palace, surrounded by the quiet luxury of his chambers. The first dream was vivid and unsettling. He dreamed that he was standing by the Nile River. The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, was a sacred and powerful symbol, the source of all fertility and prosperity for the land. And behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, sleek and fat. They were beautiful to look at, well-fed and healthy. They began to graze in the reed grass along the riverbank, a picture of abundance and contentment. Then, behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the Nile, ugly and thin. They were gaunt and sickly, a stark contrast to the first 7. They stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. This was a disturbing image, a reversal of the natural order, a sign of something deeply wrong. Then Pharaoh awoke, his heart pounding, the images of the cows still vivid in his mind. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. This time, he saw 7 ears of grain, plump and good, growing on one stalk. They were full and healthy, promising a bountiful harvest. Then, behold, 7 other ears of grain sprouted up after them, thin and blighted by the east wind. The east wind in Egypt was often a dry, hot wind that could wither crops and bring drought. These ears were shriveled and ruined. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears. Again, a disturbing image of consumption and destruction, mirroring the first dream. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Both dreams were unsettling, leaving him with a sense of unease and foreboding. In the morning, his spirit was troubled. He knew these were no ordinary dreams, they felt significant, prophetic. He sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. These were the interpreters of omens, the keepers of ancient knowledge, the men who advised the Pharaoh on matters of spiritual and mystical significance. Pharaoh told them his dreams, recounting every detail of the sleek and thin cows, the plump and blighted ears of grain. But there was no one among them who could interpret them for Pharaoh. The wise men and magicians, with all their knowledge and arcane arts, were stumped. They could offer no satisfactory explanation, no comforting meaning, leaving Pharaoh even more troubled. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, his memory finally stirred by the Pharaoh's distress. "I remember my offenses today," he began, acknowledging his past wrongdoing that led him to prison. He then recounted his experience in the prison, remembering Joseph. "When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we each had a dream in one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed with its own interpretation. And there was with us a young Hebrew man, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. He continued, and it came to pass, as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and the baker he hanged." The cupbearer's testimony was clear and compelling. He presented Joseph not just as a dream interpreter, but as one whose interpretations were unfailingly accurate, proven by the events that followed. So Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the dungeon. The summons would have been sudden, unexpected. Joseph, who had been languishing in prison for 2 long years, was now being called to the presence of the most powerful man in the world. They shaved him, and he changed his clothes. This was a necessary ritual before appearing before Pharaoh. Egyptians typically shaved their heads and bodies for cleanliness and as a sign of respect, while Hebrews wore beards. Joseph would have been given fresh, clean garments, perhaps simple linen, to replace his prison rags. The transformation would have been swift, preparing him for the momentous encounter. Then he came into Pharaoh and stood before him. The palace would have been a dazzling sight, a world away from the dark, damp prison. The walls might have been adorned with colorful hieroglyphs, the floors covered with fine mats, and the air filled with the scent of incense. Pharaoh, seated on his throne, would have been an imposing figure, surrounded by his courtiers and guards. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Pharaoh's words conveyed both his desperation and his hope. He had heard of Joseph's unique ability, and he was ready to put it to the test. Joseph answered Pharaoh, not taking credit for himself, but immediately giving glory to God. "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." He humbly stated that the ability did not come from his own wisdom or power, but was a gift from the divine. This would have been a striking statement in a court filled with polytheistic beliefs. Then Pharaoh recounted his dreams to Joseph, describing the 7 sleek and fat cows and the 7 ugly and thin cows, and how the thin cows ate the fat ones. He then described the 7 plump and good ears of grain, and the 7 thin and blighted ears, and how the thin ears swallowed the good ones. He emphasized his troubled spirit and the failure of his wise men to provide an interpretation. Joseph then spoke to Pharaoh, his voice calm and authoritative, despite his humble appearance. The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. He immediately connected the 2 seemingly separate dreams, explaining that they conveyed a single, unified message from God. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years, the dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. He continued, "Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout all the land of Egypt. After them will arise 7 years of famine, and all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the abundance will not be known in the land by reason of that famine which will follow, for it will be very severe." Joseph explained the profound significance of the dreams. The first 7 years would be a time of unprecedented prosperity, with bountiful harvests and overflowing granaries. But these years of plenty would be followed by 7 years of devastating famine, so severe that it would erase the memory of the good years. The land would be consumed by scarcity, and the people would suffer greatly. And as for the doubling of Pharaoh's dream, Joseph explained, it means that the matter is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. The repetition of the message in 2 different dreams underscored its certainty and its imminent arrival. It was a warning that Pharaoh could not ignore. Having interpreted the dreams, Joseph then offered counsel, moving beyond mere interpretation to practical advice. "Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years." He proposed a comprehensive plan for managing the coming crisis. During the 7 years of abundance, 1/5 of all the produce should be collected and stored. This would require a vast infrastructure of granaries and a highly organized system of collection and storage. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. The plan was simple yet brilliant. By saving a significant portion of the abundant harvests, Egypt could build up a massive reserve of food. This reserve would then sustain the population during the subsequent years of famine, preventing widespread starvation and the collapse of the kingdom. Joseph's advice demonstrated not only spiritual insight but also remarkable administrative foresight and practical wisdom. The proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his servants. They recognized the wisdom and practicality of Joseph's plan. It was a clear, actionable strategy to avert a national catastrophe. Pharaoh then turned to his servants and asked, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" Pharaoh recognized that Joseph's wisdom was not merely human. He perceived that a divine spirit, a powerful force, was at work within this young man. He saw in Joseph not just an interpreter of dreams, but a man endowed with extraordinary insight and capability. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you." This was an astonishing promotion, a complete reversal of Joseph's fortunes. From a slave and a prisoner, he was elevated to the second most powerful position in all of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. He would be the chief administrator, the prime minister, responsible for the entire kingdom. Pharaoh continued, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." To seal this appointment, Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. The signet ring was a symbol of authority, used to stamp official documents, making them legally binding. By giving Joseph his ring, Pharaoh bestowed upon him his own royal authority. He also clothed him in garments of fine linen, a symbol of his new high status. Fine linen was a luxurious fabric, worn by royalty and high officials in Egypt. And he put a gold chain around his neck, another mark of honor and distinction. Then he had him ride in his second chariot. The second chariot was reserved for the highest official after Pharaoh, a clear public declaration of Joseph's new rank. And they cried out before him, "Bow the knee." This was a command for the people to show respect and deference to Joseph as he passed by. Thus, Pharaoh set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." This meant that Joseph had absolute authority over every aspect of Egyptian life, from the smallest decision to the largest policy, all subject to Pharaoh's ultimate approval. Pharaoh gave Joseph an Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah, which likely meant something like "God speaks and lives," or "the one who reveals secrets." This was a common practice for foreigners who rose to high positions in Egypt, integrating them into the Egyptian social and cultural fabric. He also gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, as his wife. Potiphar was a high-ranking priest in Heliopolis, On, a major religious center. This marriage further cemented Joseph's position within the Egyptian elite, giving him a powerful family connection. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He had spent 13 years as a slave and a prisoner, having been sold by his brothers at the age of 17. Now, he was a powerful ruler, a man of immense authority and influence. Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. He began the monumental task of organizing the collection and storage of grain. This would have involved traveling extensively, inspecting fields, overseeing the construction of granaries, and establishing a system for accurately measuring and storing the vast quantities of grain. During the 7 plentiful years, the land produced in abundance. The harvests were extraordinarily rich, yielding more grain than anyone had ever seen. The Nile brought its life-giving waters, the sun shone brightly, and the earth responded with overwhelming generosity. Joseph gathered all the food of these 7 years that occurred in the land of Egypt and stored up the food in the cities. In every city, he stored the food from the fields around it. The amount of grain he collected was like the sand of the sea, so much that he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure. It was an unprecedented accumulation of wealth and resources, a testament to Joseph's organizational genius and the blessing of God. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. He named the firstborn Manasseh, saying, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house." The name Manasseh means making to forget, reflecting Joseph's desire to move past the pain of his past, the betrayal, the slavery, and the imprisonment. The second son he named Ephraim, saying, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." The name Ephraim means doubly fruitful or fruitful land, acknowledging that even in the land where he had suffered so much, God had blessed him with prosperity and a new family. These sons represented a new beginning, a new chapter in his life, far removed from the sorrows of his youth. Then the 7 years of abundance that had been in the land of Egypt came to an end. The cycle of plenty concluded, and the land prepared for a new, harsher reality. The overflowing granaries, once a symbol of endless prosperity, now became the crucial lifeline for the entire nation. And the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said. The famine was not confined to Egypt, it traveled with their donkeys, carrying empty sacks, their hearts heavy with the burden of their family's survival. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's full brother, with his brothers. Benjamin was the youngest, the only other son of Rachel, and now the sole remaining child of Jacob's beloved wife. Jacob feared that some harm might come to him, perhaps still haunted by the loss of Joseph and the pain that had inflicted upon him. He clung to Benjamin, protecting him, unwilling to risk losing another beloved son. Thus, the sons of Israel came to buy grain among the others who came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. They were just one family among countless others, all desperate for food, all making the pilgrimage to Egypt, the only place where sustenance could be found. Now Joseph was governor over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the ground. The scene was exactly as Joseph had dreamed so many years ago, the sheaves bowing down, the stars prostrating themselves. They did not recognize him. They saw only the powerful Egyptian official, the man in charge of the grain, before whom all supplicants must show respect. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them as strangers and spoke roughly to them. He disguised his voice, his manner, and perhaps his appearance, to hide his true identity. He remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them, and the memory of their betrayal, the pit, the sale, the long years of suffering must have flooded back to him. He asked them, "Where do you come from?" They replied, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." They were unaware that the powerful man standing before them, the one who held their fate in his hands, was their own brother, the one they had cast aside. Joseph remembered the dreams. He did not reveal himself. Instead, he accused them, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." This was a serious accusation, punishable by death in many ancient kingdoms. It was a test, a way to probe their character and to uncover the truth about his family. They said to him, "No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies." They vehemently denied the accusation, trying to convince him of their innocence and their true purpose. He said to them, "No, but you have come to see the nakedness of the land." He pressed the accusation, maintaining his stern demeanor. He wanted to see how they would react, how they would defend themselves, and what they would reveal about their family. They said, "Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more." They revealed details about their family, about their father, and about their youngest brother, Benjamin. And in their words, Joseph heard the confirmation that he was indeed no more to them, that they believed him to be dead. The mention of one is no more must have been a chilling reminder of their own cruel deception. But Joseph said to them, "It is as I told you, you are spies. By this you shall be tested, as Pharaoh lives. You shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here." He swore by the life of Pharaoh, a solemn oath in Egypt, and laid down a condition for their release. He demanded that they bring Benjamin to him, a way to verify their story and to bring his beloved full brother into his presence. "Send one of you, and let him bring your brother, while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you. Or else, as Pharaoh lives, surely you are spies." He proposed a plan: one brother would return to Canaan to fetch Benjamin, while the others remained as hostages. This would ensure their compliance. So he put them all together in custody for 3 days. The brothers, who had once thrown Joseph into a pit, now found themselves confined, perhaps in a prison cell, experiencing a taste of what Joseph had endured. The darkness, the uncertainty, the fear of the unknown would have weighed heavily upon them. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, "Do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined in your prison, and let the rest go and carry grain for the famine of your households. And bring your youngest brother to me, so your words may be verified, and you shall not die." He modified his plan, offering a slightly less harsh option, perhaps seeing their genuine fear and wanting to ensure their families received food. He invoked God, a subtle hint of his own faith, though they would not have understood its significance. So they did so. They agreed to his terms. And they said to one another, "Truly we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul, when he begged us and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." Their confinement, the fear of death, and the memory of their past actions finally stirred their consciences. They believed that their current suffering was divine retribution for their cruelty to Joseph. Reuben answered them, "Did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you did not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood." Reuben, who had tried to save Joseph, reminded them of his warnings, and the weight of their guilt, the reckoning for his blood, settled upon them. They did not know that Joseph understood them, for there was an interpreter between them. Joseph had been speaking to them through an interpreter, maintaining his disguise. But he understood every word they said, every confession of guilt, every pang of remorse. He heard their words, and he turned away from them and wept. The raw emotion, the pain of their past actions, and the realization of their regret, overwhelmed him. He composed himself, then turned back to them. Then he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Simeon, perhaps one of the more aggressive brothers, was chosen as the hostage. The act of binding him would have been a stark demonstration of Joseph's power and their own helplessness. And Joseph gave orders to fill their sacks with grain, and to replace every man's money in his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. He secretly returned their money, a gesture of quiet generosity, perhaps a seed of future reconciliation, or another test of their honesty. This was done for them. Then they loaded their donkeys with the grain and departed from there. The brothers, with Simeon left behind in prison, began their journey back to Canaan, their hearts a mix of relief at having grain, and dread over the fate of Simeon and the daunting task of bringing Benjamin to Egypt. As one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder at the lodging place, he saw his money in the mouth of his sack. The sight of the silver, unexpectedly returned, must have filled him with alarm. He called out to his brothers, "My money has been restored. Here it is in my sack." Their hearts sank, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, "What is this that God has done to us?" They interpreted this strange occurrence as another sign of divine judgment, another layer of misfortune. They feared that this too would be used against them, another accusation of theft, another reason for the powerful Egyptian governor to punish them. The journey back to Canaan, already fraught with anxiety, became even more unsettling with this mysterious discovery. They continued their slow, weary journey, the weight of their secret and their new predicament pressing down on them, the desert wind whispering around them, carrying the dust of their past and the uncertainty of their future. The desert wind whispering around them, carrying the dust of their past and the uncertainty of their future. The caravan, now moving with a renewed sense of unease, pressed on towards Egypt. The sun, high in the sky, beat down relentlessly, baking the sand to a shimmering, almost blinding white. The air was thick with the smell of dust, sweat, and the faint, sweet scent of the spices carried in the merchants' sacks. The rhythmic creak of the camel saddles and the soft padding of their feet on the sand were the only constant sounds, punctuated occasionally by a low grunt from a camel or a quiet word exchanged between the traders. Joseph, bound and jostled, could feel the coarse rope chafing against his wrists and ankles, a constant, uncomfortable reminder of his new reality. Each bump and sway of the camel brought a dull ache to his body, but his mind, in its own way, was also numb, trying to process the swift, brutal change in his circumstances. Days bled into one another. The landscape shifted subtly, from the rocky, arid hills of Canaan to the flatter, more expansive plains that signaled the approach to the Nile Delta. Joseph, though his eyes were often downcast, would occasionally lift his head, catching glimpses of the passing world. He saw distant oases, green smudges against the horizon, offering a fleeting promise of water and shade. He saw other caravans, sometimes larger, sometimes smaller, moving in different directions, their own stories unfolding under the vast, indifferent sky. The merchants, a mix of Ishmaelites and Midianites, spoke in a language he only partially understood, a blend of Semitic dialects that was distinct from the Hebrew spoken in his father's tents. Their conversations were practical, concerning trade routes, prices, and the condition of their goods, devoid of any personal warmth or concern for the young man they now considered their property. As they drew closer to Egypt, the signs of a more settled civilization began to appear. The occasional glimpse of a mud-brick dwelling, a small cultivated field, or a distant plume of smoke rising from a village. The air grew heavier, more humid, a stark contrast to the dry, crisp air of the desert. The smells changed too, a mix of damp earth, cooking fires, and the faint, earthy scent of the Nile itself, even before it was visible. Joseph, despite his despair, felt a flicker of curiosity. He had heard tales of Egypt from travelers who occasionally passed through his father's lands, stories of its immense river, its grand cities, its powerful pharaohs. Now, he was being taken there, not as a visitor, but as a commodity. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the caravan reached the outskirts of a major Egyptian city. It was likely Memphis, the ancient capital, a bustling metropolis that served as a primary hub for trade and administration in the Old Kingdom and later periods, though by Joseph's time, Thebes was also a significant center. The sheer scale of the city would have been overwhelming. Walls of sun-dried brick, towering and imposing, rose from the flat landscape. Beyond them, a labyrinth of narrow streets, crowded with people, animals, and goods. The air was thick with the cacophony of 1,000 different sounds, the braying of donkeys, the bleating of goats, the shouts of vendors, the chatter of passers-by, the distant clang of metal on metal from a workshop, and the constant hum of human activity. The merchants guided their camels through one of the city gates, a massive structure guarded by soldiers in linen kilts, armed with spears and shields. The gate itself would have been adorned with painted reliefs, depicting scenes of pharaohs triumphing over enemies or offering to the gods. The passage through the gate was slow, a bottleneck of people and carts. Joseph, still bound, was jostled by the crowd, his senses assaulted by the sheer volume of new experiences. The smells were even more varied here: spices, incense, cooking food, the earthy scent of the Nile mud, the acrid smell of animal waste, and the perfume of exotic flowers. The colors were vibrant, the deep blue of lapis lazuli, the rich red of carnelian, the gleaming gold of jewelry, the bright white of freshly laundered linen worn by the wealthier citizens. They made their way through the bustling streets, past stalls overflowing with pottery, woven textiles, papyrus scrolls, and an array of foodstuffs. Joseph could see artisans at work, potters shaping clay on their wheels, weavers meticulously working at their looms, scribes carefully inscribing hieroglyphs onto papyrus. The architecture was unlike anything he had ever seen. While his father's people lived in tents or simple stone dwellings, here the houses were multi-storied, made of mud brick, often whitewashed, with flat roofs where families might gather in the cooler evenings. Elaborate temples, their massive pylons reaching towards the sky, dedicated to various gods like Ra, Osiris, and Isis, would have dominated the skyline, their courtyards filled with priests and worshippers. The caravan eventually arrived at the slave market, a designated area within the city where humans were bought and sold. This was a common practice in the ancient world, a grim reality of the time. The market was a chaotic scene, filled with buyers and sellers, all haggling over prices. Slaves from various lands, Nubians from the south, Libyans from the west, Syrians and Canaanites from the north, were displayed, their faces often reflecting resignation or fear. Joseph was led off the camel, his legs stiff and aching from the long journey. The ropes were removed, but he was kept under close watch. He stood among others, his shepherd's tunic, now dusty and travel-worn, a stark contrast to the finer linen garments worn by many of the Egyptians around him. A merchant, one of the Midianites who had bought him, began to call out his attributes, describing him as young, strong, and capable. He spoke in Egyptian, a language Joseph was only just beginning to discern the sounds of, but the meaning was clear enough. Joseph stood tall, trying to maintain a semblance of dignity, though his heart was heavy with a mix of fear and a profound sense of abandonment. He wondered if his brothers had felt any remorse, any regret, after they had left him in that pit. He wondered if his father was even now searching for him, his heart aching with worry. These thoughts were a dull throb beneath the surface of his immediate awareness, as he tried to absorb the overwhelming reality of his present situation. Among the potential buyers who circulated through the market, one man stood out. He was an Egyptian of some importance, judging by his fine linen kilt, his elaborate collar of beads and precious metals, and the respectful way others made way for him. This man was Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. His role would have involved overseeing the palace security, managing the royal household, and perhaps even acting as a high-ranking military commander. He was a man of authority, accustomed to command, and his gaze was sharp and discerning as he surveyed the available slaves. Potiphar paused before Joseph. He looked at the young man carefully, noting his strong build, his intelligent eyes, and perhaps even a certain bearing that spoke of a background different from that of a common laborer. He spoke to the merchant in crisp, authoritative Egyptian, asking questions about Joseph's age, his origin, and any skills he might possess. The merchant, eager to make a good sale, exaggerated Joseph's virtues, emphasizing his youth and strength. Joseph understood enough to know he was being appraised, much like a piece of livestock or a finely crafted tool. After a brief negotiation, a price was agreed upon. Silver coinage, perhaps in the form of rings or spirals, would have been exchanged. The exact amount is not specified, but it would have been a sum deemed appropriate for a young, healthy male slave. Joseph was now officially the property of Potiphar. He was led away from the market, away from the clamor and the dust, and towards a new, unknown life within the household of this powerful Egyptian official. The transition was swift, almost brutal in its efficiency. One moment he was a shepherd boy, the next a slave, and now he was being taken to a grand house in a foreign land. Potiphar's house would have been a substantial dwelling, reflecting his status as a high-ranking official. It would have been a large, walled compound, likely built of mud brick, perhaps plastered and painted. Inside, there would have been courtyards, gardens, and numerous rooms for living, cooking, and storage. The air within the compound would have been cooler, quieter than the bustling streets, perhaps scented with the perfume of flowers from the garden or the aroma of baking bread from the kitchens. Joseph was brought into this new world, a stark contrast to the open fields and simple tents of his youth. He was likely given a new set of clothes, perhaps a simple linen kilt, replacing his travel-stained tunic. He would have been assigned tasks, starting with the most menial. In a large household like Potiphar's, there would have been many servants, both free and enslaved, performing a variety of duties: cleaning, cooking, carrying water, tending to the animals, maintaining the gardens, and assisting the master and mistress. Joseph, despite his previous life as a favored son, now found himself at the bottom of this new hierarchy, learning the routines and expectations of an Egyptian household. The language barrier would have been significant. While Joseph likely had some exposure to other Semitic tongues, Egyptian was a distinct language with its own complex grammar and vocabulary. He would have had to learn quickly, listening intently to the commands given by the overseers, observing the actions of other servants, and slowly, painstakingly, piecing together the meaning of words and phrases. This process of learning a new language, combined with the physical demands of his new duties, would have been exhausting, both mentally and physically. Yet, despite the harshness of his circumstances, a remarkable thing began to happen. The text states that the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. This is a quiet but profound observation. It doesn't describe miraculous interventions or dramatic rescues, but rather a subtle, pervasive blessing that seemed to follow Joseph even in his darkest moments. He possessed an innate diligence, an intelligence, and a capacity for hard work that, combined with this divine favor, allowed him to excel in whatever task he was given. Potiphar, a shrewd and observant man, began to notice Joseph. He saw that whatever Joseph put his hand to, prospered. The tasks he was assigned were completed efficiently and effectively. He was reliable, trustworthy, and seemed to possess an unusual aptitude for management. This was not just about physical labor, it was about an ability to organize, to anticipate needs, and to execute duties with a level of competence that stood out among the other servants. In a large household, where efficiency was key to smooth operation, such qualities were invaluable. Slowly, Joseph's responsibilities grew. He was promoted from the general ranks of servants to a position of greater trust and authority. Potiphar saw that he could rely on Joseph implicitly. The text says that Potiphar made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. This was a significant promotion, elevating Joseph to a position of considerable power and responsibility within the household. He was no longer just a slave, he was the chief steward, managing all of Potiphar's affairs. As chief steward, Joseph would have been responsible for a vast array of duties. He would have managed the other servants, assigning their tasks, overseeing their work, and ensuring the smooth running of the entire household. He would have been in charge of the household's finances, managing the accounts, purchasing supplies, and perhaps even overseeing the sale of surplus goods. He would have been responsible for the household's provisions, ensuring there was enough food, water, and other necessities for all who lived there. He would have managed Potiphar's personal effects, his valuables, and his daily schedule. In essence, he became the de facto manager of Potiphar's entire estate. This level of trust was extraordinary for a slave, especially a foreign one. It speaks volumes about Joseph's character and his undeniable competence. Potiphar, a busy and important official, found that he could completely delegate the management of his domestic affairs to Joseph. He no longer had to concern himself with the day-to-day running of his household, knowing that Joseph would handle everything with skill and integrity. The text states that Potiphar knew not what he had, save the bread which he did eat. This colorful idiom means that Potiphar was so confident in Joseph's management that he didn't even need to concern himself with the details of his own meals. Everything was simply taken care of. And again, the quiet observation is made, "The Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field." This wasn't just about Joseph's personal success, it was a blessing that extended to everything connected with him. The fields under his oversight yielded abundant harvests. The livestock flourished. The household ran with an efficiency and prosperity that surpassed what it might have achieved without Joseph's stewardship. This was a tangible, observable blessing, a silent testament to the presence of a divine hand in Joseph's life, even in the midst of his servitude. Joseph, during this time, would have learned a great deal about Egyptian culture, administration, and the intricacies of managing a large estate. He would have become fluent in the Egyptian language, understanding its nuances and complexities. He would have observed the social customs, the religious practices, and the political structures of this powerful civilization. He was no longer just a shepherd boy from Canaan, he was becoming an integral part of an Egyptian household, albeit still as a slave. He was, in a sense, being educated and prepared, though he could not have known for what purpose. The years passed. Joseph, who had been a young man of 17 when he was sold, was now growing into a mature man. The hardships he had endured, the responsibilities he had taken on, had shaped him. He was described as handsome in form and handsome in appearance. This detail, though seemingly superficial, is significant in the narrative, hinting at future complications. In ancient Egypt, physical appearance was often valued, and a well-groomed, attractive individual might draw attention, both positive and negative. It was this very attractiveness that eventually led to trouble. Potiphar had a wife, a woman who, like many wealthy Egyptian women, would have lived a life of relative leisure within the confines of her husband's estate. Her name is not given in the biblical text, but her actions are clearly recorded. She began to notice Joseph, observing his handsome appearance, his confident bearing, and his position of authority within the household. Her gaze, at first perhaps merely appreciative, soon turned to desire. In the enclosed world of a large estate, where the mistress of the house had considerable power over the servants, such a situation could easily arise. She would have had ample opportunity to observe Joseph, to speak with him, and to make her intentions known. One day, the text states, she cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." This was a direct, unambiguous proposition, a command rather than a request, reflecting her position of power. Joseph's response was immediate and firm. He refused. His refusal was not merely a polite decline, it was a principled stand. He explained his reasons clearly, appealing to his loyalty to Potiphar and his reverence for God. He reminded her of the immense trust Potiphar had placed in him. "Behold, my master knows not what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife." This statement highlighted the sacred trust that had been placed in him, a trust that extended to the sanctity of Potiphar's marriage. But Joseph's reasoning went deeper than mere loyalty to his master. He added, "How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" This reveals the core of Joseph's character. Even in a foreign land, surrounded by polytheistic worship, Joseph maintained his faith in the one God of his fathers. He understood that adultery was not just a betrayal of Potiphar, but a profound transgression against divine law. This moral compass, deeply ingrained, guided his actions even when faced with temptation and potential danger. Potiphar's wife, however, was not easily deterred. Her desire for Joseph persisted. Day after day, she continued to press him, to entice him, to urge him to lie with her. The situation became a constant source of tension and difficulty for Joseph. He could not simply avoid her, as he was the chief steward and had duties that required him to be present throughout the household. He tried to avoid being alone with her, to minimize the opportunities for her advances, but her persistence was relentless. One day, the opportunity she had been seeking arose. Joseph went into the house to do his work, and it happened that none of the men of the house were inside. This was an unusual circumstance. Perhaps the other servants were working in the fields or attending to duties outside the main dwelling. She seized the moment. She caught him by his garment, repeating her demand, "Lie with me." Joseph, faced with this aggressive advance, reacted swiftly. He pulled away from her, leaving his garment in her hand as he fled out of the house. This was a desperate act, a clear rejection that left no room for misinterpretation. His flight was a testament to his determination to uphold his integrity, even at personal risk. He chose to escape the situation, leaving behind a piece of himself, rather than succumb to her demands. Potiphar's wife, now scorned and enraged, found herself holding Joseph's garment. Her desire quickly turned to fury and a desire for revenge. She knew that her position and reputation were at stake. If her husband were to believe that she had made advances towards a slave, it would be a scandal. So, she quickly concocted a lie, twisting the events to make Joseph appear as the aggressor. She called out to the men of her household, the other servants who were now returning or nearby. She cried out, accusing Joseph, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." Her words were carefully chosen to inflame prejudice against Joseph, identifying him as a foreigner, a Hebrew, and painting him as an insolent attacker. The garment, left behind in her hand, served as her evidence. She kept the garment with her until her husband, Potiphar, came home later that evening. The atmosphere in the house would have been heavy with her fabricated distress. When Potiphar arrived, she repeated her story to him, embellishing it further, emphasizing Joseph's supposed audacity and the insult to their household. "The Hebrew servant, whom you have brought among us, came in to me to mock me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." Her narrative was designed to elicit anger and outrage from her husband. Potiphar, hearing his wife's words and seeing Joseph's garment, was filled with wrath. The text simply states, his anger was kindled. This was a serious accusation, one that, if true, would be a profound betrayal of trust and a grave offense against his honor. In ancient Egyptian society, a master's honor was paramount, and any perceived affront, especially involving his wife, would be met with severe punishment. The fact that Joseph was a slave, a foreigner, would have made the accusation even more infuriating to an Egyptian official. Without further investigation, without questioning Joseph, Potiphar acted swiftly and decisively. He took Joseph and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. This was not just a simple holding cell, it was a royal prison, a place for those who had committed serious offenses against the state or high-ranking officials. It was likely a grim, dark, an uncomfortable place, a stark contrast to the comfortable life Joseph had enjoyed as chief steward. The fall from grace was sudden and complete. From managing an entire estate, Joseph was now confined to a prison cell, his hands and feet perhaps bound with fetters, or his neck secured in a wooden stock, a common form of restraint in ancient Egyptian prisons. The air would have been damp and stale, the light dim, and the sounds a chilling mix of groans, whispers, and the clanking of chains. The smells would have been of unwashed bodies, mildew, and human waste. This was a place of despair, a place where hope often withered and died. Yet, even in this new, desperate situation, the narrative once again makes a quiet but powerful statement, "But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." This is a remarkable continuity. Despite being unjustly accused and imprisoned, Joseph was not abandoned. The divine presence that had guided him in Potiphar's house continued to be with him, manifesting not through immediate release, but through the unexpected favor of his new captor. The keeper of the prison, a man accustomed to dealing with criminals and despairing individuals, observed Joseph. Perhaps he saw the same qualities that Potiphar had seen: his integrity, his diligence, his calm demeanor even in adversity. Or perhaps it was simply the unseen hand of divine favor influencing the man's perception. Whatever the reason, the prison keeper developed a trust in Joseph, a trust that would once again lead to a significant elevation in his circumstances, even within the confines of a prison. The keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the prison, and whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. This was an astonishing level of trust. Joseph, a prisoner himself, was put in charge of all the other prisoners. He was given authority over them, responsible for their management, their welfare, and the daily operations of the prison. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. So, Joseph, the unjustly accused slave, became the de facto manager of the royal prison. His days would have been filled with the grim realities of prison life, but also with the responsibilities of his new role. He would have overseen the distribution of food and water, managed the limited resources of the prison, and perhaps even mediated disputes among the prisoners. He would have interacted with a diverse group of individuals, from common criminals to high-ranking officials who had fallen out of favor with Pharaoh. This experience, though born of injustice, was once again preparing him, teaching him about human nature, about administration, and about the intricacies of Egyptian justice and power. He was learning to lead, even from the depths of a prison, under the watchful, silent favor of the Lord. The days in the prison settled into a routine, a rhythm of existence that was both monotonous and, in its own way, instructive. Joseph, now accustomed to the stone walls and the distant sounds of the city, continued his duties. He oversaw the other prisoners, ensuring their needs were met, their complaints heard, and the daily tasks of the prison carried out with a quiet efficiency. The chief jailer, a man whose face had grown accustomed to the shadows of his profession, trusted Joseph implicitly. He saw in the young Hebrew a steadiness, a quiet competence that was rare among the men brought to his charge. Joseph moved through the prison, his sandals whispering on the packed earth floors, his eyes observing, always learning. The air within the prison often carried the scent of stale bread, damp earth, and the faint, metallic tang of human confinement. Sometimes, when the wind shifted, he could catch a whiff of the Nile, a faint, earthy smell of water and reeds, reminding him of a world beyond these walls, a world he had once known and perhaps would know again. The sun, when it reached the inner courtyard, would cast sharp, angular shadows that slowly stretched and receded throughout the day, marking the passage of time with silent precision. One morning, as the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the high, narrow windows, casting a weak glow on the rough-hewn stone, Joseph noticed a change in two of the most prominent prisoners under his care. These were not ordinary men, they were high officials from Pharaoh's own court, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. They had been imprisoned for an offense against their royal master, though the exact nature of their transgression remained a matter of hushed speculation among the other inmates. They sat apart from the others, their usual demeanor of quiet resignation replaced by a palpable unease. The chief cupbearer, a man whose hands were accustomed to holding finely wrought goblets of wine, now nervously clasped them together. The chief baker, whose days were usually filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread and sweet pastries, seemed to have lost his appetite. Joseph approached them with his usual calm, his voice a low murmur that would not disturb the still morning air. "Why do you look so troubled today?" he asked, his gaze gentle and inquiring. He had come to know these men during their time in prison, observing their habits, their quiet conversations, their moments of despair and fleeting hope. He understood that something significant had disturbed their inner peace. The chief cupbearer sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of his anxiety. "We both had dreams last night," he began, his voice a little hoarse. "And there is no one here to interpret them." In ancient Egypt, dreams were not merely random firings of the mind, they were believed to be messages, often from the gods, or omens of future events. Interpreters were highly valued, their skills sought after by kings and commoners alike. The absence of such a person in the confines of the prison was a source of profound distress for the two officials. Joseph listened patiently, his head tilted slightly, his expression unreadable. He remembered his own dreams, those vivid, unsettling visions from his youth that had set in motion this long, arduous journey. He knew the power of dreams, and he knew, too, the source of true interpretation. "Do not interpretations belong to God?" he asked softly, a quiet assertion of his faith, even in this pagan land. "Please tell them to me." The cupbearer, perhaps sensing a flicker of hope in Joseph's steady gaze, began his story. "In my dream," he recounted, his eyes distant as he tried to recall the precise details, "I saw a vine in front of me. And on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms came out, and its clusters ripened into grapes." He paused, perhaps remembering the sweetness of the fruit, a stark contrast to the bland fare of the prison. "Pharaoh's cup was in my hand," he continued, his voice gaining a slight tremor of anticipation. "And I took the grapes, and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup into Pharaoh's hand." He described the scene with the meticulous detail of one who had performed this very ritual countless times, the familiar weight of the cup, the smooth, cool skin of the grapes, the rich scent of the freshly pressed juice. Joseph listened, his eyes calm, his mind sifting through the imagery. He did not rush, did not interrupt. He allowed the narrative to unfold, absorbing each detail, each nuance. The cupbearer finished, his gaze fixed on Joseph, waiting. After a moment of quiet contemplation, Joseph spoke, his voice even and clear. "This is the interpretation of it," he said. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer." A flicker of relief, tentative but undeniable, crossed the cupbearer's face. The words were simple, direct, and carried a ring of truth. Joseph then continued, his tone shifting slightly, a quiet plea woven into his words. "But remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this prison. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit." He spoke of his origins, of the injustice that had brought him to this place, not with bitterness, but with a simple statement of fact. He was not asking for pity, but for justice, for a memory to be planted in the mind of a man who would soon stand before the most powerful ruler in the known world. The cupbearer nodded, his relief making him amenable, his promise given with sincerity in that moment. Seeing the positive outcome for the cupbearer, the chief baker, who had been listening intently, felt a surge of hope. He, too, had a dream, and perhaps Joseph could offer him similar solace. He stepped forward, his voice a little more eager than before. "I also had a dream," he began. "And in my dream, there were 3 white baskets on my head." He described the baskets, perhaps woven from palm fronds, common in Egyptian life, their whiteness suggesting a certain purity or preparation. And in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. He continued, detailing the delicacies he would normally prepare: rich breads, sweet cakes, perhaps even elaborate pastries shaped like animals or symbols. But the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. The image was unsettling, a violation of his craft, a defilement of the food intended for the king. The baker finished, his hope now mingled with a growing apprehension. He watched Joseph's face, searching for a similar expression of calm assurance, but Joseph's gaze remained steady, unrevealing. Joseph took a moment, his eyes perhaps seeing beyond the immediate imagery, discerning the deeper meaning. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant sounds of the prison, a clanking chain, a muffled cough. Then Joseph spoke, his voice still calm, but now carrying a different weight, a quiet solemnity. "This is the interpretation of it," he said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days Pharaoh will lift off your head and hang you on a tree. And the birds will eat the flesh from your body." The words hung in the air, stark and final. The baker's face, which had been alight with hope moments before, now drained of color, his eyes wide with dawning horror. There was no softening of the blow, no attempt to mitigate the grim prophecy. Joseph simply stated what he saw, what he understood to be the truth revealed. He did not rejoice in the bad news, nor did he shrink from delivering it. It was simply the interpretation, given with the same quiet certainty as the good news. 3 days passed in the prison, each one heavy with anticipation for the cupbearer, and with dread for the baker. Joseph continued his duties, observing the 2 men, their fates now sealed in the words he had spoken. The air was thick with unspoken tension. The other prisoners, perhaps sensing the shift in atmosphere, kept their distance, their whispers hushed. On the 3rd day, a day which was also Pharaoh's birthday, the prison gates creaked open, and a contingent of royal guards entered. Pharaoh, in celebration of his birth, often held a feast for all his servants, and on such occasions, it was customary to review the cases of prisoners, granting pardons or confirming sentences. This was a common practice in ancient monarchies, a demonstration of royal power and mercy. The guard summoned the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Joseph watched them go, a quiet observer of the unfolding prophecy. The chief cupbearer, though still nervous, walked with a lighter step, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. The chief baker, however, moved with the leaden gait of a man walking towards his inevitable end, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the ground. Later that day, the news filtered back into the prison, carried by the guards who returned, or perhaps by whispers from those who had witnessed the events. Pharaoh, indeed, had restored the chief cupbearer to his position. He was once again at Pharaoh's side, pouring wine into the royal cup, his hand steady, his life returned to its former rhythm. The chief baker, however, had been hanged, his fate fulfilling Joseph's grim interpretation. The birds, as prophesied, had come to his body. Joseph heard the news, his expression unchanging. He felt no triumph, no despair. It was simply the unfolding of what had been revealed. The accuracy of his interpretations, however, must have solidified his reputation within the prison, confirming to the chief jailer and the remaining prisoners that this young Hebrew possessed an extraordinary gift. Yet, despite the dramatic fulfillment of the prophecies, the chief cupbearer, now back in the opulent halls of Pharaoh's palace, forgot Joseph. The promise made in the dim light of the prison cell, the quiet plea for remembrance, faded from his mind amidst the luxuries and demands of his restored position. The memory of the young man who had spoken truth into his despair was eclipsed by the immediate concerns of his renewed life. 2 full years passed. During these 2 years, Joseph remained in the prison. The days continued to blend into weeks, and weeks into months. He continued his duties, his quiet efficiency unwavering. The initial hope that had sparked with the cupbearer's release must have slowly dimmed, replaced by a renewed sense of patient endurance. The stone walls remained, the distant sounds of the city continued, the smell of stale bread and damp earth persisted. He was still the overseer, still the trusted prisoner, but he was still a prisoner. He would have seen the sun rise and set countless times, painting the narrow strip of sky visible from the courtyard in hues of orange, purple, and grey. He would have felt the changing seasons, the dry heat of summer giving way to the cooler breezes of winter, the occasional, rare rain bringing a temporary freshness to the air. He would have heard the distant sounds of Egyptian life, the shouts of merchants, the lowing of cattle, the rhythmic chants of workers, all reminders of a world he was separated from. His faith, however, remained. He had seen the hand of God at work, even in the darkest corners of his life. He had been sold by his brothers, falsely accused, and unjustly imprisoned, yet in each place, he had found favor. He had learned about the intricacies of Egyptian society, about power and administration, about human nature, both its kindness and its cruelty. He had honed his skills, not just in managing people, but in discerning the deeper currents of events. And then, after these 2 long years, Pharaoh himself began to have dreams. These were not ordinary dreams, fleeting and easily forgotten. These were vivid, disturbing visions that left him deeply troubled upon waking. Pharaoh, as the living embodiment of the gods, the divine king of Egypt, took such omens very seriously. The stability of his kingdom, the prosperity of his people, were believed to be intrinsically linked to his favor with the deities, and dreams were a direct channel for their messages. One night, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile River. The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, was central to every aspect of their existence, providing water for crops, a highway for trade, and a source of sustenance. To dream of the Nile was to dream of the very essence of Egypt. In his dream, 7 sleek and fat cows came up out of the river and began to graze in the marsh grass. These were healthy, robust animals, symbols of prosperity and abundance. The sight would have been reassuring, a vision of well-being. But then, after them, 7 other cows came up out of the Nile, ugly and gaunt. Their ribs were visible, their hide stretched taut over their bones. They were so thin, so sickly, that they looked as if they were about to collapse. And these gaunt, ugly cows stood beside the sleek, fat cows on the bank of the Nile. Then, to Pharaoh's horror, the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. The image of the strong being consumed by the weak, the abundant by the desolate, was deeply unsettling. Pharaoh woke up, his heart pounding, the vividness of the dream still clinging to him. He tried to shake it off, to dismiss it as a mere nightmare, but the feeling of unease persisted. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. This dream was equally disturbing. He saw 7 heads of grain, plump and good, growing on a single stalk. The grains were full, heavy, promising a bountiful harvest, a symbol of agricultural prosperity, much like the fat cows. But then, after them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The east wind in Egypt was often a dry, hot wind, known as the Khamsin, which could wither crops and bring dust storms. These thin, scorched grains were a stark contrast to the plump ones, suggesting desolation and ruin. And the thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 plump and full heads. Again, the image of depletion, of the good being consumed by the bad, the fruitful by the barren, repeated itself. Pharaoh woke up a second time, thoroughly disturbed. He knew these dreams were not random, they were significant, portending something important for his kingdom. In the morning, Pharaoh's spirit was troubled. He sent for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. These were the royal interpreters, the scholars, the priests who were trained in deciphering omens, reading hieroglyphs, and understanding the will of the gods. They were brought into the royal court, their faces solemn, their minds prepared for the task of interpreting the divine messages. Pharaoh recounted his dreams to them, describing each detail with precision: the sleek cows, the gaunt cows, the plump grain, the scorched grain, and the unsettling consumption in both visions. He watched their faces, searching for understanding, for a glimmer of insight. But none of them could interpret the dreams for Pharaoh. The wise men whispered among themselves, consulted their scrolls, their knowledge of symbols and omens, but the meaning of these particular visions eluded them. Their faces grew increasingly perplexed, their inability to provide an answer a source of growing anxiety in the royal court. The air grew heavy with unspoken concern. The king's troubled spirit cast a shadow over the palace. At this point, the chief cupbearer, who had been standing among the other officials, suddenly remembered. The memory, perhaps jogged by the king's distress over inexplicable dreams, surfaced from the depths of his mind, clear and distinct. He remembered the young Hebrew in the prison, the one who had interpreted his dream with such accuracy, and the baker's dream with equal precision. "I remember my offenses today," the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, his voice breaking the tense silence of the court. He spoke with a mixture of shame for his past imprisonment and eagerness to offer a solution to the king's dilemma. "When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard." He continued, recounting the events of that time, the dreams they had, and the young Hebrew man, Joseph, who was with them in the prison. "We each had a dream," he explained, "and he interpreted our dreams, each according to his own dream. And as he interpreted for us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged." Pharaoh listened intently, his expression shifting from troubled to intrigued. A glimmer of hope appeared in his eyes. If this young man could interpret dreams with such accuracy, perhaps he held the key to understanding these unsettling visions. The chief cupbearer's sudden recollection, after 2 long years of silence, felt like a divine intervention. Immediately, Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. Messengers were dispatched to the prison, their urgency conveying the importance of the king's command. The guards arrived at the prison, their presence a sudden disruption to the quiet routine. Joseph, who had been going about his daily duties, was informed that the king wished to see him. There was no time for elaborate preparations. Joseph was quickly brought out of the dungeon. He shaved himself, a common practice for Egyptians, as facial hair was often associated with foreigners or neglect. He changed his clothes, perhaps into something cleaner, more presentable, though still simple. The prison grime and the rough garments were shed, a symbolic casting off of his long confinement. He was then brought into the presence of Pharaoh. The transition from the dim, confined space of the prison to the vast, opulent halls of the royal palace must have been striking. The air would have been filled with the scent of incense, the murmur of courtiers, the gleam of polished stone and precious metals. The sheer scale of the palace, its vibrant colors and intricate carvings, would have been a stark contrast to the drab, austere environment he had inhabited for so long. Pharaoh looked at the young Hebrew man, perhaps noting his calm demeanor, his steady gaze, despite the suddenness of his summons and the grandeur of his surroundings. "I have had a dream," Pharaoh began, his voice authoritative, "and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph stood before the most powerful man in Egypt, a man considered a god on earth. Yet, his response was not one of self-promotion or fear, but of humble truth. "It is not in me," Joseph replied, his voice clear and steady. "God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." He immediately deflected the credit from himself, placing the source of interpretation where it truly belonged, with his God. This was a bold statement in the court of a pagan king, a quiet declaration of his unwavering faith. Pharaoh then proceeded to tell Joseph his dreams, recounting them with the same detail and distress he had shown to his own wise men. He spoke of the 7 sleek and fat cows coming up from the Nile, grazing in the marsh grass. He described the 7 ugly and gaunt cows that came up after them, so thin and sickly, and how they ate up the fat cows. He recounted his troubled awakening. Then he told of his second dream, the 7 plump and good heads of grain on a single stalk, and the 7 thin, scorched heads that sprouted after them, and how the thin heads swallowed up the plump ones. He finished, his gaze fixed on Joseph, waiting for the answer that had eluded all his own wise men. Joseph listened, his mind working, connecting the symbols, understanding the message. The repetition of 7, the contrast of abundance and scarcity, the consumption of the good by the bad, the pattern was clear. He did not hesitate, did not consult scrolls or incantations. He spoke with the quiet authority of one who understood. "The dreams of Pharaoh are one," Joseph declared, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the silence of the royal court. "God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do." He explained that the 2 dreams, though different in imagery, conveyed the same message, reinforcing its importance and certainty. "The 7 good cows are 7 years," Joseph continued, "and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years, the dreams are one. The 7 ugly and gaunt cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty heads of grain scorched by the east wind are 7 years of famine." He laid out the interpretation with simple, direct language, leaving no room for ambiguity. Behold, Joseph explained, 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them, 7 years of famine will arise, and all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the abundance will not be known in the land by reason of that famine which will follow, for it will be very severe. He painted a clear picture of the future, a period of unprecedented prosperity, followed by a time of devastating scarcity. The contrast was stark, the warning undeniable. The land of Egypt, so dependent on the annual flooding of the Nile for its fertility, was vulnerable to such cycles of feast and famine, though a famine of this magnitude would be catastrophic. And as for the doubling of Pharaoh's dream, Joseph continued, addressing the fact that Pharaoh had 2 dreams with similar themes. It means that the matter is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. The repetition was not a coincidence, but a divine emphasis, a confirmation of the certainty and imminence of the events. Having delivered the interpretation, Joseph did not stop there. He understood that a warning without a plan was incomplete. He moved from interpreter to advisor, offering practical wisdom born from his own experiences of administration, even in the confines of a prison. Now therefore, he suggested, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. He continued, outlining a strategy for survival. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. Joseph's plan was clear: systematic collection and storage of surplus grain during the years of abundance, creating a reserve for the impending famine. This was a massive undertaking, requiring careful planning, meticulous record-keeping, and widespread cooperation across the entire kingdom. It was a testament to his administrative insight, his ability to see beyond the immediate crisis and plan for the long term. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, he concluded, so that the land may not perish through the famine. His words were not just about survival, but about preventing utter devastation, about preserving the very fabric of Egyptian society. Pharaoh and all his servants were pleased with the proposal. The wisdom of Joseph's counsel was evident. It was not just an interpretation of a dream, but a practical, actionable plan that offered a path forward through the looming crisis. The relief in the court was palpable. The king's troubled spirit began to ease. Pharaoh then turned to his servants, his voice filled with a new sense of purpose. "Can we find a man like this?" he asked, gesturing towards Joseph, in whom is the Spirit of God. It was a profound recognition, not just of Joseph's wisdom, but of the divine source of that wisdom. In a land of many gods, Pharaoh acknowledged the presence of a greater power at work in this young Hebrew. Then, Pharaoh spoke directly to Joseph, his words elevating the young man from prisoner to prime minister in a single breath. "Since God has shown you all this," Pharaoh declared, "there is none so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you." This was an extraordinary promotion, unprecedented for a foreigner, a former slave, and a prisoner. Joseph was being placed in a position of immense power, second only to Pharaoh himself. He would be responsible for the entire administration of Egypt, for implementing the vast plan of food storage and distribution. Pharaoh then took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. The signet ring was a symbol of authority, used to seal official documents, granting Joseph the power to act in the king's name. It was a tangible transfer of immense responsibility and trust. He clothed Joseph in garments of fine linen, the white, soft fabric of royalty and high office, a stark contrast to the rough clothes of a prisoner. He placed a gold chain around his neck, a mark of his new status and wealth. These were not just gifts, they were symbols of his complete integration into the highest echelons of Egyptian society. He had Joseph ride in his second chariot, a clear public display of his elevated position, a procession through the streets of the capital, where people would have seen this dramatic transformation. And before him, they cried out, "Bow the knee!" This was the traditional acclamation for a high official, a public acknowledgement of his authority and importance. Thus, Pharaoh set him over all the land of Egypt. Joseph, the Hebrew slave, the unjustly imprisoned man, was now the vizier, the chief minister, of the most powerful empire in the world. He was given an Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah, a name that likely meant God speaks, he lives, or the man to whom secrets are revealed. This renaming was a symbolic rebirth, a complete integration into his new role and identity within Egyptian society. Pharaoh also gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, as his wife. On, or Heliopolis, was a major religious center, and Potiphar was a prominent figure, indicating a marriage that further solidified Joseph's position within the Egyptian elite. This union would have been a significant political and social alliance, binding him to the powerful priestly class. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. 30 years since his birth, 13 years since he was sold into slavery at the age of 17. 13 years of trials, of injustice, of learning and waiting, all culminating in this moment of dramatic elevation. He left the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt, beginning the monumental task of preparing for the coming years of plenty and famine. He began to organize the collection of grain, establishing depots, appointing overseers, setting up the infrastructure for the largest food storage program in ancient history. The quiet man from the prison was now the architect of Egypt's survival, his steady gaze now fixed on the horizon, preparing for the future, under the watchful, silent favor of the Pharaoh himself. 7 years passed, years of abundant harvest across the whole land of Egypt. The Nile, that life-giving river, rose faithfully each season, its waters spreading across the fertile plains, depositing rich, dark silt that nourished the earth. The sun shone brightly, day after day, warming the soil, coaxing forth a bounty of grain such that the like had never been seen before. The fields stretched out, vast and golden, under the clear Egyptian sky, heavy with ripe wheat and barley. The air during these harvest times would have been thick with the scent of dry straw, dust, and the earthy sweetness of freshly threshed grain. Joseph, now a man of perhaps 37 or 38 years, moved through these scenes of plenty with a quiet purpose. His days were filled with the meticulous work of gathering and storing. He traveled extensively, overseeing the construction and filling of the granaries in every city. These weren't just small sheds, they were massive structures, often built of mud brick, designed to withstand the elements and keep the precious grain safe from pests and decay. Imagine the sheer scale of it: countless workers, their backs bent under the hot sun, carrying baskets of grain, pouring it into these vast storage pits and chambers. The sounds would have been a constant hum of activity: the creak of wooden levers, the rhythmic thud of grain falling, the soft murmur of voices, the occasional bray of a donkey pulling a cart. The biblical text tells us that Joseph gathered so much grain, like the sand of the sea, very much, until he stopped counting, for it was beyond measure. This phrase, like the sand of the sea, is a common ancient Near Eastern idiom for an immeasurable quantity, an abundance beyond human comprehension or calculation. It speaks to the sheer, overwhelming scale of the surplus. The granaries would have been filled to bursting, layer upon layer of golden kernels, carefully documented and sealed. The air inside these massive storage facilities would have been cool and dry, carrying the faint, sweet smell of stored grain, a smell that represented security and life itself. During these years of plenty, Joseph also became a father. The Pharaoh, in his appreciation and favor, had given Joseph a wife, Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. On, or Heliopolis as the Greeks later called it, was a very important city in ancient Egypt, a center of sun worship, dedicated to the god Ra. Potiphar would have been a man of significant standing, a high-ranking official within the religious hierarchy. This marriage was another clear sign of Joseph's complete integration into Egyptian society, a testament to his elevated status. It was a strategic alliance, cementing his position within the powerful ruling class. Asenath would have been an Egyptian woman, accustomed to the customs and traditions of her homeland. Their home, perhaps a comfortable estate provided by the Pharaoh, would have been a blend of Egyptian and, subtly, Joseph's own quiet nature. The walls might have been adorned with painted scenes common in Egyptian homes, agricultural motifs, river scenes, perhaps even depictions of the gods. The air would have carried the scent of incense, a common practice in Egyptian households, and the gentle sounds of daily life, perhaps the distant bleating of goats or the calls of street vendors. To Joseph and Asenath, 2 sons were born during these years of abundance, before the years of famine began. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, a name that means causing to forget. He explained his choice, saying, "God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house." This name reveals a deep, quiet yearning for healing and release from the pain of his past. It wasn't a forgetting in the sense of erasing memories, but rather a profound sense of peace and reconciliation with his fate, a feeling that the bitterness of his separation from his family, the injustice of his imprisonment, had been overshadowed by the blessings he now experienced. It was a quiet acknowledgement of God's hand in his journey, transforming sorrow into joy. His second son, he named Ephraim, which means fruitfulness or doubly fruitful. Joseph said, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." This name speaks to his present reality. Despite the hardships he had endured, despite being a stranger in a foreign land, he had prospered. He had not only survived but thrived, becoming a source of life and sustenance for an entire nation. The names of his sons were not just labels, they were quiet declarations of his personal journey, echoing his faith and his understanding of the divine purpose in his life, even amidst the grandeur of his Egyptian surroundings. Then, as the biblical account details, the 7 years of plenty came to an end. The last golden fields were harvested, the last granaries sealed. A subtle shift in the air, a different quality of light, might have signaled the change. The familiar rhythm of the Nile's generous overflow began to falter. The river, which had for so long brought life, now seemed to hold back its bounty. The annual inundation, so crucial for Egyptian agriculture, became less robust, then meager, then almost non-existent. The rich, dark earth, usually replenished by the floodwaters, began to dry out, to crack under the relentless sun. The famine began, just as Joseph had foretold. It was not a sudden, catastrophic event, but a gradual, creeping desiccation. First, the crops were sparse, then they failed altogether. The vibrant green of the fields turned to brittle brown. The air, once filled with the scent of growing things, became dry and dusty. The sounds of agricultural prosperity, the singing of harvesters, the lowing of cattle in lush pastures, slowly faded, replaced by a quiet anxiety, a growing sense of dread. The famine was not confined to Egypt alone. It spread across all the lands, a vast and devastating drought that gripped the entire region. The ancient Near East was a network of interdependencies, and a failure of crops in one area often meant scarcity in others. The biblical text emphasizes this widespread nature of the famine, stating that there was famine in all lands. This detail is important, as it sets the stage for the eventual reunion of Joseph with his family. In Egypt, however, the people still had food. The granaries, built under Joseph's careful supervision, now held the key to their survival. The Pharaoh's foresight, guided by Joseph's interpretation, had saved the nation. When the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread, he simply directed them, "Go to Joseph, whatever he says to you, do." This simple instruction underscored Joseph's absolute authority and the Pharaoh's complete trust in him. Joseph was the sole dispenser of life in a land facing death. Joseph opened all the storehouses. Imagine the scene, the massive doors, perhaps made of heavy wood and reinforced with metal, slowly creaking open, revealing mountains of golden grain within. The air, once still and cool, now stirred with the movement of people, the sounds of their murmuring voices, their footsteps echoing in the vast chambers. The scent of stored grain, once a quiet promise, now became the very essence of hope. People from all the surrounding countries began to come to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere. The roads leading into Egypt, usually busy with merchants carrying goods, now saw a different kind of traffic, desperate families, their faces etched with hunger, their possessions meager, all driven by the same urgent need for food. They would have traveled for days, perhaps weeks, under the harsh sun, their animals weary, their hopes pinned on the distant promise of Egyptian grain. The sounds of their journey would have been the creak of carts, the soft padding of sandaled feet, the occasional cry of a child, all against the backdrop of a parched and silent landscape. Far away, in the land of Canaan, the famine was also taking its toll. Jacob, now an old man, perhaps around 130 years old, watched his family and his flock suffer. The land that had once flowed with milk and honey, a land of pasture and spring, was now dry and barren. The familiar sounds of his camp, the bleating of sheep, the lowing of cattle, the chatter of his many children and grandchildren, would have been muted, overshadowed by the gnawing reality of hunger. The air would have been dry and dusty, carrying the scent of parched earth. Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt. News traveled slowly in those days, carried by merchants, travelers, and word of mouth. Perhaps a passing caravan, returning from Egypt, spoke of the abundance there, of the great granaries and the powerful vizier who controlled them. The news would have sparked a flicker of hope in the hearts of Jacob and his sons. Egypt, that distant, powerful land, was now their only recourse. Jacob looked at his sons, his 10 remaining sons, for Joseph was long gone, and Benjamin, the youngest, was still with him. He asked them, "Why do you look at one another? Why do you just sit there?" His words carried a mixture of frustration and urgency. Action was needed. "Behold, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy grain for us, so that we may live and not die." His voice, though perhaps weakened by age and worry, would have held the authority of a patriarch, a man responsible for the survival of his large family. So, 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain. Benjamin, Joseph's full brother, the youngest of Jacob's children by Rachel, was not sent with them. Jacob feared that some harm might befall him, just as he believed had happened to Joseph. Benjamin was now the sole remaining son of his beloved Rachel, a precious link to a cherished past. Jacob's protective instincts, perhaps heightened by the grief he still carried for Joseph, kept Benjamin close. The thought of losing another son was unbearable. The 10 brothers embarked on their journey. Imagine their preparations: gathering donkeys, filling water skins, packing what little they had. The journey from Canaan to Egypt was long and arduous, perhaps a distance of several hundred miles, depending on their starting point. It would have taken weeks, traveling through arid landscapes, under the relentless sun, sleeping under the vast, star-filled desert sky. The sounds would have been the steady rhythm of donkey hooves on dry earth, the creak of saddlebags, the whispering wind, and the quiet conversations of men on a desperate mission. The air would have been hot and dry, filled with the scent of dust and sweat. They eventually arrived in Egypt, a land of stark contrast to their parched homeland. The sight of the Nile, even during a famine, would have been a welcome relief, a sign of life amidst the desolation. They joined the throngs of people from other nations, all converging on the administrative centers where the grain was being distributed. The atmosphere would have been a mix of desperation and order, as the Egyptian officials, under Joseph's direction, managed the immense logistical challenge of feeding so many. When Joseph's brothers arrived, they came before him and bowed down with their faces to the ground. This act of prostration was a customary sign of deep respect and submission in the ancient Near East, especially when approaching a high-ranking official or ruler. It was a gesture performed without conscious thought, a simple adherence to protocol. They did not recognize Joseph. How could they? He was now a powerful Egyptian vizier, dressed in fine linen, wearing the symbols of his office, speaking Egyptian through an interpreter. 22 years had passed since they had last seen him, a young man of 17, dressed in a coat of many colors, tending sheep. Joseph, however, recognized them immediately. The sight of them, after all these years, must have been a profound moment for him. The biblical text doesn't describe his immediate emotional reaction, but one can imagine a sudden rush of memories, the pit, the betrayal, the dreams, the long years of servitude and imprisonment. Yet, his demeanor remained calm, controlled, utterly professional. He remembered the dreams he had dreamed about them, the dreams of sheaves bowing down to his sheaf, and of the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowing to him. These dreams, which had once been the source of their jealousy and his suffering, were now unfolding before his eyes. He spoke to them harshly, through an interpreter, asking, "Where do you come from?" He treated them as strangers, perhaps even with a hint of suspicion, testing them. This harshness was not born of malice, but of a deeper purpose, a need to understand their hearts, to see if they had changed, and to orchestrate the fulfillment of the divine plan. The sound of his voice, speaking in Egyptian, would have been foreign to them, adding to their unease. They replied, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." They were humble, perhaps a little intimidated by this powerful Egyptian official. They would have been focused solely on their mission, to acquire grain and return to their starving families. The air in the audience chamber would have been cool, perhaps scented with incense, a stark contrast to the dusty roads they had traveled. Joseph then accused them, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." This accusation was a common tactic in ancient diplomacy and warfare. Knowing the vulnerabilities of a land, especially during a time of famine, could be valuable intelligence for an enemy. This was a serious charge, one that could have grave consequences. The brothers would have felt a surge of fear, their faces paling under their tanned skin. They vehemently denied the accusation, saying, "No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man, we are honest men. Your servants are not spies." They tried to explain their lineage, hoping to establish their credibility. The sound of their voices, earnest and pleading, would have filled the chamber. But Joseph insisted, "No, you have come to see the nakedness of the land." He pressed them, maintaining his stern facade. He was observing their reactions, listening to their words, searching for any sign of deceit or, more importantly, any sign of remorse or change. They then offered more details about their family, hoping to convince him. "Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. Indeed, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more." This last phrase, "one is no more," would have struck Joseph deeply. It was a quiet confirmation of what they had told their father, the lie they had maintained for over 2 decades. He knew he was that one. Joseph seized on this detail. "It is as I told you," he said, "you are spies. By this you shall be tested, as Pharaoh lives. You shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you, and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested, whether there is any truth in you. Or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." His voice would have been firm, leaving no room for argument. The weight of his authority was absolute. He then put them all together in custody for 3 days. Imagine the brothers, confined in an Egyptian prison, A dark, damp place, perhaps built of heavy stone or mud brick, with small, barred windows high up near the ceiling. The air would have been stale, carrying the scent of damp earth and human confinement. The sounds would have been the quiet shuffling of their feet, the distant murmurs of guards, and the gnawing anxiety in their own minds. For 3 days, they would have had nothing to do but reflect on their predicament, on the powerful Egyptian official, and on the terrifying possibility of never returning home. On the 3rd day, Joseph spoke to them again. He was still maintaining his disguise, his stern demeanor. "Do this and live, for I fear God," he said. This phrase, "I fear God," is a subtle but significant detail. It hints at Joseph's true character, his underlying moral compass, even as he played the part of a harsh official. It suggests that his actions were not arbitrary cruelty but part of a larger, divinely guided plan. "If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house, but you, go and carry grain for the famine of your houses. And bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die." This was his offer, a way out, but one that came with a heavy price, the return of Benjamin. It was a test, designed to reveal their character and their loyalty to their family. The brothers agreed to this. They understood the gravity of the situation. One of them would have to remain behind as a hostage, a guarantee that they would return with Benjamin. They spoke to one another, not realizing that Joseph understood their language, for there was an interpreter between them. Their voices would have been filled with despair and regret, a quiet murmuring in the dim light of the prison. They said to one another, "We are truly guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear, therefore this distress has come upon us." This was a moment of profound introspection, a quiet confession among themselves. The memory of Joseph, his pleas, his suffering, had haunted them for 2 decades. Now, in their own distress, they saw a direct consequence of their past actions. The weight of their guilt, long suppressed, now resurfaced with crushing clarity. Reuben, the eldest, reminded them, "Did I not speak to you, saying, 'Do not sin against the boy,' and you would not listen? Therefore behold, his blood is now required of us." Reuben's words carried the quiet bitterness of a man who had tried to do right but was overruled. The phrase "his blood is now required of us" speaks to the ancient belief in divine retribution, that their past sin was now being repaid. The air would have been heavy with their shared remorse. Joseph turned away from them and wept. He could not maintain his composure any longer. The raw honesty of their confession, the depth of their regret, touched him deeply. His tears would have been silent, perhaps quickly wiped away, hidden from their sight. He had heard their hearts, and it was a moment of profound emotional release for him. The years of pain, the longing for his family, the hope for their repentance, it all converged in that quiet moment of weeping. Then he returned to them and spoke to them again. He chose Simeon from among them and had him bound before their eyes. Simeon, perhaps one of the more aggressive brothers, or perhaps chosen for a reason known only to Joseph, was taken. The sight of their brother being bound, his hands and feet perhaps tied with ropes, would have been a chilling reminder of their own vulnerability and the power of the Egyptian vizier. The sounds of the ropes, the quiet struggle, would have added to the tension in the room. Joseph then commanded his servants to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money into his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. This act, restoring their money, was another layer of Joseph's complex plan, a further test, and a quiet act of grace. It was designed to create confusion, to stir their consciences, and to ensure their return. The servants would have moved quietly, efficiently, carrying out their master's orders. The rustle of grain being poured, the clinking of coins being placed back into the sacks, would have been the only sounds. So the brothers loaded their donkeys with the grain and departed from Egypt. The journey back to Canaan would have been filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief that they had secured food for their families, but apprehension about Simeon, about the powerful Egyptian official, and about the daunting task of convincing their father to send Benjamin. The weight of the grain on their donkeys would have been a physical representation of their burden, both literal and emotional. As one of them opened his sack at the lodging place to give his donkey feed, he saw his money in the mouth of his sack. This discovery would have been a moment of shock and confusion. The man, perhaps Reuben or Judah, would have called out to his brothers, his voice filled with alarm. The other brothers would have gathered around, peering into the sack, seeing the silver coins glinting in the dim light of the camp. Their hearts sank, and they were afraid, saying to one another, "What is this that God has done to us?" The discovery of the money, unexplained and unexpected, immediately led them to a spiritual interpretation. In their minds, it was not merely a mistake or a trick, but a sign of divine intervention, a further consequence of their past sin. The fear of God, a profound sense of being under divine judgment, settled over them. The quiet desert night would have amplified their anxieties. They continued their journey, burdened by this new mystery, until they arrived back in the land of Canaan, to their father Jacob. Imagine the reunion, the relief of seeing their families, the hungry faces of their children, the anxious gaze of their old father. They would have unloaded the grain, the precious sustenance that meant life. The air would have been filled with the scent of dry earth and the quiet murmurs of relief and worry. They recounted to their father all that had happened to them, saying, "The man, the lord of the land, spoke roughly to us and took us for spies of the country. But we said to him, 'We are honest men, we are not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father, one is no more, and the youngest is with our father today.' Then the man, the lord of the country, said to us, 'By this I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me, and take food for the famine of your households, and go your way. And bring your youngest brother to me, so I shall know that you are not spies, but that you are honest men. I will deliver your brother to you, and you may trade in the land.' As they emptied their sacks, behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. When both they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. The sight of the money, not just in one sack but in all of them, confirmed their fears. It was not a mistake. It was something deliberate, something mysterious, something that pointed to a deeper, more troubling situation. Jacob, seeing the money, would have felt a renewed wave of despair. Their father Jacob said to them, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and you want to take Benjamin away. All these things are against me." His voice would have been filled with the anguish of an old man who felt life was conspiring against him. The loss of Joseph, the disappearance of Simeon, and now the demand for Benjamin, it was too much. He saw only tragedy, unable to comprehend the hidden purpose behind these events. Reuben, ever the firstborn, tried to reassure his father. "You may kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back." This was a desperate pledge, a dramatic offer that showed the depth of his commitment. But Jacob was inconsolable. He said, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone is left. If harm should befall him on the journey on which you go, then you would bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave." Jacob's words were final. His grief for Joseph, still raw after all these years, made him cling to Benjamin with fierce protectiveness. The thought of losing Benjamin was unbearable, a wound too deep to contemplate. The quiet sounds of their camp, the rustling of the wind through the tents, would have been the only response to Jacob's despair. The famine, however, continued to be severe in the land. The grain they had brought from Egypt slowly dwindled. The days turned into weeks, then months, and the scarcity returned, a constant, gnawing presence. The fields remained barren, the animals grew thin, and the faces of the children grew gaunt. The air would have been dry, carrying the scent of hunger and desperation. The quiet murmurs of worry would have replaced any lingering hope. When they had eaten up the grain which they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go back, buy us a little food." The necessity was undeniable. They could not simply sit and starve. Jacob, despite his earlier resolve, knew they had no other choice. His voice would have been weary, resigned. Judah, ever the pragmatic and responsible one, spoke up. The man solemnly warned us, saying, "You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down, for the man said to us, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.'" Judah's words were a stark reminder of the vizier's unyielding demand. There was no negotiating. Jacob then questioned them, "Why did you deal so treacherously with me as to tell the man whether you had still another brother?" He was frustrated, perhaps even angry, that they had revealed so much information to the powerful Egyptian official. He saw it as a reckless disclosure that had put Benjamin in jeopardy. His voice would have held a tremor of exasperation. They replied, "The man asked us particularly about ourselves and our family, saying, 'Is your father still alive? Have you another brother?' And we answered him according to these words. Could we possibly have known that he would say, 'Bring your brother down'?" They defended themselves, explaining that they had simply answered the questions put to them, unaware of the consequences. The memory of the stern Egyptian official would have been fresh in their minds. Judah then addressed his father again, his tone serious and resolute. "Send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you and also our little ones. I myself will be surety for him, from my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. For if we had not lingered, surely by now we would have returned a second time." Judah's pledge was a powerful one, offering his own life as a guarantee for Benjamin's safety. He understood the urgency, the dire consequences of inaction. His words carried the weight of a man willing to sacrifice for his family's survival. The quiet determination in his voice would have been palpable. Jacob, faced with the stark reality of starvation and Judah's earnest plea, finally relented. His voice, though still tinged with sorrow, would have held a new resolve. If it must be so, then do this: take some of the best fruits of the land in your vessels and carry down a present for the man, a little balm and a little honey, spices and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds. And take double money in your hand, and take back in your hand the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Jacob's instructions were practical, born of ancient customs of diplomacy and appeasement. The gifts were precious commodities from Canaan, meant to soften the heart of the powerful Egyptian official. The double money was a gesture of honesty, an attempt to rectify the mysterious return of their funds. The air would have been filled with the quiet rustle of preparations, the gathering of these valuable items. And take your brother also, and arise, go back to the man. And may God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may release your other brother and Benjamin. If I am bereaved, I am bereaved. This last phrase, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved, was a profound expression of Jacob's resignation, a quiet acceptance of whatever fate might befall them. It was a testament to his deep faith, even in his despair, acknowledging that some things were beyond his control. He was entrusting his youngest son, his last link to Rachel, to the hands of fate and the mercy of God. The quiet sounds of their departure preparations would have filled the air, a blend of hope and profound uncertainty. So the men took that present and double money in their hand, and Benjamin, and arose and went down to Egypt, and they stood before Joseph. The journey this time would have been even more fraught with anxiety, with Benjamin, a young man, in their company. They would have guarded him carefully, aware of the immense responsibility they carried. The sounds of their travel, the creak of their carts, the steady pace of their donkeys, would have been a constant reminder of their mission. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Take these men to my house, and slaughter an animal and prepare it, for these men shall dine with me at noon." This was an unexpected command, a gesture of hospitality that would have surprised both the steward and the brothers. To dine with the vizier was an immense honor, a sign of favor, but also a source of great apprehension for the brothers. The steward, a trusted servant, would have moved quickly to carry out the order, the sounds of his preparations beginning to fill the air. The man did as Joseph ordered, and he brought the men to Joseph's house. The brothers were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house. They thought, "It is because of the money, which was returned in our sacks the first time, that we are brought in, so that he may make a case against us and seize us, to take us as slaves with our donkeys." Their fear was palpable. They interpreted this unexpected hospitality as a trap, a prelude to further trouble. Their past guilt, combined with the mystery of the money, led them to expect the worst. The quiet sounds of their footsteps on the polished floors of Joseph's grand house would have echoed their apprehension. So they came near to the steward of Joseph's house and spoke to him at the door. "Oh, my lord," they said, "we indeed came down the first time to buy food, and it happened, when we came to the lodging place, that we opened our sacks, and there, each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight, and we have brought it back in our hand. And we have brought down other money in our hands to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks." They were eager to explain, to clear themselves of any suspicion, to show their honesty. Their voices would have been earnest, perhaps a little trembling. The steward's response was calm.